Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello friends, in the last talk where we talked about the theoretical aspect of creativity, we were anticipating coming to this part where we would be actually looking at some tools which can be used by you for creativity. However, before we go on to that, let us have a quick overview of the areas that we are going to address, as well as the little bit of refreshing of what we had done the last time. So, we will start by looking at some key points which kind of emerged from our last discussion and a few additional points. We will be looking at some games and some activities which I will be sharing with you, and if required handouts can also be provided, and a summary of the main points followed by the references. Some of the books that you can follow, you can look it up on the websites, and certain web pages where you can access some of the material. However, as I have shared with you, I will be sharing some material along with this video lecture which might help you with any kind of individual or group activity that you might have in mind. So, these are the points to remember. The first thing you need to do is to dissociate the two kinds of thinking, the evaluative thinking from creative thinking, because when you are doing any kind of analytical thinking, your focus is primarily on what is the correct thing to do, what is the logical sequence of events, does it make sense or not, and things like that. But when you are doing generative thinking, you are not bothered about these things. Your essential focus is on creation, however illogical, outlandish, ridiculous it might seem. So, that is something which we will have to keep in mind. Assumptions need to be questioned. Every time we push the boundaries, some existing assumptions are thrown out of the window. For instance, even if you are looking at an area like science where reasoning dominates, the logocentric worldview which existed till the Renaissance told us that the earth is the center of the universe. So, obviously, there were certain assumptions which were working and which were very deep rooted, because if you are looking at things seem to be moving around us rather than we moving. Okay. And it was only when these assumptions were thrown away that we started moving towards a sun-centric concept of the universe. So, even if we are looking at sciences, we find such a situation arising. Pattern thinking, patterns are important, exploring patterns is significant, that is fine, but pattern thinking is a thinking which is based on existing patterns, and that can be inimical to creativity or creative ideas, because you are going to move along lines which have already been created by you. So, the possibility of exploring new lines may not exist. Creating of new perspective is something which you are encouraged to do. Look at things from a different point of view. Let us say that some of the best photographs happen to be photographs which start looking at things in a new way. If you are looking at the history of painting also, you find that some of the new dimensions of painting which emerge significantly happen to be of that kind. For instance, if we look at the European tradition which is known as Impressionism, it happened to look at the world in a new way. Earlier paintings were done in studios. Impressionism started looking at painting from life itself. So, you went outside and you painted what you saw at a specific point of time. So, you see that this desire to grasp the reality as it is at that particular moment, to capture a moment in a photographic way, but as an impression gave rise to a new movement altogether. So, you see that in music also that kind of a thing has happened, where you see that a particular kind of music has given way to a new kind of music. That is because the way you are looking at music has changed. So, new perspectives. Negative thinking is essentially something which closes our mind. It sets off panic reactions. It is something which is good for doing routine work at times, but for creative thinking it closes the channels, because you are in a hurry or there is a kind of a flight or fight response. There is a tendency to shut channels, creative channels. The brain kind of shuts himself and focuses on doing only the minimal activity, because it is linked to the concept of survival. When fear, anxiety, stress are associated, when negative things are associated with that, then what happens is that our thinking process is kind of blocked. Negative thinking can have such causes, but sometimes negative thinking can become an attitude, and when it becomes an attitude, the problem that you face is that you start looking at the dark side of things, and you start trying to find reasons why something should not be done. So, obviously, the possibilities that we are talking about today and as well as in the earlier lectures stop appearing in front of us, and then of course, taking risks, because anything new that you are going to do, any exploration that you are doing, any new method you are trying to impose or implement or whatever, there is a certain amount of risk involved. It might fail, but then you will have to take that chance, and in most cases if it is well thought out, it generally succeeds. So, having said that, the kind of saying that I had referred to, I have already referred to this book by Van Gundy, and some of the tools that we are going to look at least the first two tools are from the same book by Van Gundy, which is there in the references. Is I might try to partially do these experiments with you, not experiments, games with you, but the best thing to do would be to actually try it out on your own. Now, you see that if you remember in the last session we talked about the fact that when you start exploring new channels, when you start exploring new possibilities, when you keep on doing a thing even when the solution has been achieved, okay, it is only then that there is the possibility of coming up with something very, very new, something which you have not looked at. Our general tendency, and this is something which is again linked to our survival instinct, is that the moment we find a solution, we stop there. Human beings, like all other animals, have been geared, hardwired for survival, and when it comes to survival, optimization is something which is a very, very dominant strategy used. That is why, as discussed earlier, heuristic thinking very often is what you have rather than critical or analytical thinking, even when that is possible. For instance, you have a 200 ml glass containing 200 ml of cold drinks, and you have a 500 ml glass containing 200 ml of cold drinks. The general tendency is to pick up the full small glass of cold drinks rather than going for the larger glass which is containing the same amount of cold drinks. These can be strategies. Here we do not think, there is a heuristic thinking, we do not go for analytical thinking. The brain optimizes its resources. So, because the brain optimizes its resources, the moment solution is there, the moment it seems that the problem is over, we stop there, we switch to other problems which are facing us. One of these tendencies that we have to create is to keep on thinking of solutions in spite of the fact that we have already got a solution. Now, many of the games that we are talking about right now are essentially about that. Sometimes it becomes difficult once you have got a solution, the desire to come up with other solutions is lost, that motivation is lost. But when at the same time a lot of possible solutions are generated, and until you piece them together you do not know the solutions exist, you keep on being able to generate more number of ideas. Now, many of those ideas might be ridiculous, outright funny, absolutely unusable, but it is also possible that one or two of them are very relevant, interesting and new, and can be used in a meaningful way. So, if you are looking at the first one, which is known as semantic intuition, developed by Scott in 1978 and revised by Van Gundy. You see that what you can do is, let us take the example of an ice cream company which wants to create a new ice cream, okay, and let us call it Cool Congo. You have given a name to it. Now, let us say that we create two categories, and we initially do not try to connect them. So, the first one is about packaging, and the second one is about people who might have this ice cream. So, about packaging you generate a set of ideas. So, under packaging you might think of a cool colors, you might think of let us say something which looks like or resembles Congo. Okay. You can think of playing around with the word Congo with maybe bongo or other musical instruments, whatever, and you can think of packaging which is very different, okay, associated with maybe a ship where somebody is going to that place, or an aeroplane, a flight which is going in that direction, something or the other. What you have done is that you have isolated packaging, you are not thinking about the users. Now, let us look at the users. So, you might start thinking about user attributes, you might think of a user who is thirsty, you might think of a user who is hot, you might think of a user who would like to go to Congo, you might think of a user who is trendy because young, interested in trying out new flavors. So, you might be interested in a dynamic or somebody who is an adventurous kind of a let us say person. Now, what you have is that you have two sets of ideas, and now if you start linking, let us say, cool colors with heat, you might come up with an interesting idea, or something which looks like Congo, you can explore it, link it up with dynamic young people who are drinking, and you can come up with a new set of ideas. You can look at the Congo bongo thing and you can say, okay, fine, maybe I can link it up with thirsty and maybe another word which kind of jingles, okay, frosty. So, thirst and frost, they kind of match, and Congo and bongo, they kind of match. Then maybe you can think of a musical instrument, it can have something which creates the ambience of that place, maybe a drum, okay, and you might have, let us say, ice cream package which looks like a drum, and you can have it inside, and here maybe those legends can be there. So, you see that you are able to come up with certainly new ideas which, if you are not linked it, if you had isolated them right at the beginning, I am sorry, if you are not isolated, if you had thought of them together, you may not have come up with, because these are discrete ideas, and later on we will be looking at this with free association, where this is taken to its extreme, and this is a moderate form of that. But you see that you can take up a problem, you can explore it, and probably will come up with some very interesting solutions to your problem. So, this is one of the examples of a game that you can have. You can also have a different kind of a game if you want, which is to help participant develop as many creative ideas as possible. I like it, I like that, and basically again I will explain that it is like analogy. Okay. Now, what you have is what you have over here is you are trying to create an analogy. You have another problem which another technique which is known as forced analogy, and I will talk about that a little later, but this is again a variant of that. Let's say that your basic problem is how to get more students interested in learning. So, your main problem is students must learn, but let us say that you say that students learning is very much like maybe a dog getting interested to play with you, asking a child to learn a new game, asking an old person to learn how to use computer, and you can make a series of such possible points as is indicated here in the PowerPoint. Okay. Now, let us say that you pick up either many of them or you can pick up even one of them. Let us say that we take up the one which is the most ridiculous, make a dog interested in playing with you. How do you make a dog interested in playing with you? Maybe you have some reward for it, the dog. Maybe you go outside, because the dog may not be interested to play. You can have a kind of a game that might make the dog interested in playing with you. You might have a pathway where you are playing around or jumping or running or whatever you are doing. You can also have some restraints, like the dog on a chain or whatever it is. You can think of reward. We have talked about, let us say the reward is a bone over here, but you can talk of other things also. So, at least let us say that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I have come up with 5 ideas. You can come up with many other ideas. Now, let us suddenly quickly link it to students' learning. At least apparently students' learning can be rewarded in some way. Student learning can also take outside the classroom, take place outside the classroom. Students' learning can be fun. You can have games. Students' learning can follow specific pathways. You can demarcate pathways and link it to how the learning process takes place. You can also have certain restraints on what they can do or not, certain rules governing their entire process of learning, so that the entire thing that you have talked about here, the games and all that, are restricted, controlled, restrained in a particular way. So, you find that just by making a casual relationship between two different contexts, you are able to relate something which happens in one context with something which happens in a different context, draw a parallel and use analogies. Analogies are very powerful tools for generating creative ideas, and I hope you will try this out as well. There are many other methods. Now, there are some classic methods like trial and error, where you keep on trying to do things again and again. So, that is always there, but that is something we have already discussed in the context of theorization, that trial and error is you keep on trying something until it succeeds at some point of time, you master that technique. But that kind of learning generally takes place, let us say if you are learning archery, or you are learning how to play tennis, or you are trying to be a better cyclist. So, your skills gradually improve, they do not suddenly the ideas do not come up. So, that is a different kind of thing. Means and analysis, that what do I want, what is there at the end, what are the resources I have, let me bring them together. Well, those things are there. Analogies I have already discussed, and schema is where you have a particular framework and you use that for how you assimilate those things in the context of learning. And divergent thinking. Schema can be inhibitory in the sense that if you have an existing schema, very often learning, the moment you want to come up with new ideas, you generally go back to your schema, because there is a tendency of the brain trying to do less work, because the brain attempts generally to be as lazy as possible, as I have just discussed with you. So, these are some of the points and some of the methods. Now, we will come to a few other methods. Analogy is like this, is like that. In some sense, a plane is like a bird, they both fly, they both have wings, they can both travel for a long way without landing, both can sense where they are going, but they are not similar in that they have different means of propulsion, are made of different things. So, when you are making an analogy between two things, very different things. If I say that I would like to make an analogy between a pen and a human being, then it is probably very difficult, but then after some time probably I can come up with some very distant kind of relationship. I can say that the pen has a certain period of life, after which it stops writing. Human being also has life, after which the human being is dead. Pen has a cover and an interior. There is a outer side of the pen and there is something inside the pen. Human being body also has something outside and then something inside. So, you see that if you want to go for creating analogies among very disparate things, we keep on doing that. In fact, in poetry, you see that analogies, metaphors, similes, they are the I would say the backbone of creativity. You make very startling relationships, creates very startling relationships, build up very powerful analogies, and then you find that wow, that this is very beautiful, because you are trying to establish a relationship which nobody else had thought of. let us say a poet thinks of this sky as a huge blanket which is moth eaten. So, through the moth eaten folds, okay, you can see the stars. Now, this is an analogy and it is so beautiful as a metaphor. In fact, one of the poets actually did that, okay, Hume, in one of his very short poems. So, analogies are very, very powerful. Analogies can be used very creatively. You can have biological analogies, you can have analogies for solving mechanical problems. That is in fact how, if you are looking at Da Vinci's creations, obviously he looked at the flying machine, that is birds, in order to develop his ideas of flying machines. In fact, if you are looking at the entire evolution of the flying machine and aeroplanes, at least in the early phase, the evolution, the development started by looking at birds. So, from a biological metaphor you start developing mechanical metaphor. Most of the things focus on that kind of a thing. So, here are some techniques that I have shared with you, and this is available in the slides which I am sharing. So, let us not go into the details of it. I am just making you aware of the way that you can explore this. Okay. Here is another one I am sharing with you, attribute listing. Take an existing system or product, break it down into small parts or subsets, identify various ways of getting these parts. Can they be recombined to form a new product of systems? So, you identify a set of, one can add event product one wishes to improve, listed attributes, say pen, material, what are the different kinds of material from which it can be made, what are the different shapes it can have, what can different targets, what are the different colors it can have, texture. So, again you are isolating the different components, and if you are making a list, you can come up with very interesting ideas. For instance, the moment you talk about shape, you can come up with all kinds of outlandish shapes, and you might find that kids may enjoy having, let us say, pen which looks like Mickey Mouse, or a pen which looks like let us say Tom and Jerry. So, you can in fact you have such pens in the market. So, shape is something which gives way to a lot of imagination, and you are coming up with interesting ideas. Colors in the same way. The moment I talk about, let us say, fluorescent colors or glitter, okay, you come up with interesting ideas, or translucent, transparent, sky colored, or you see that you start talking about the colors of, let us say, fabrics, then texture colored paints and all kinds of new things come up. Same with textures. Material, you have been using series of different kinds of material, you can come up with innovations for new kind of material, let us say biodegradable material. Material, when the pen, you throw away the pen, after a few days the pen kind of decomposes. So, its recycling is not a problem, green pen you can call it. You can come up with a number of very interesting ideas which can sell in the market. Okay. So, brainstorming is something else which I would slightly elaborate, because this is something this is a technique which I will just touch upon. I will, in the slides the details have been given. What exactly are we talking about when we are talking about brainstorming? If you remember right at the beginning, we said that you need to differentiate analytical thinking from creative thinking. In the context of brainstorming, you are essentially doing divergent, illogical, irrational, unreasoned thinking. You are doing what is known as free association. You are coming up with any idea under the sun which comes to your mind in relation to a word or any kind of thing. Now, new terms which have been introduced are known as brain writing, which is when you see that brainstorming is a vocal activity in a class or in a group of people. Some people might be very shy, and these shy people will not come up with their ideas. They might have very interesting, very exciting ideas. So, brain writing is where anonymously you write down a series of ideas and drop it into a box, and once the pool box is opened, since there are no names, nobody knows who the idea has come from. The shy person also expresses herself, and at the end you come up with, start discussing these ideas. Okay. Now, brainstorming, this is one part of brainstorming, and then obviously after brainstorming has been completed, you try to piece the things together and identify what exactly is happening, and you go for analytical thinking, so that you can converge and come up with a usable kind of a material at the end of it. So, suspension of your belief, rationality, and as I told you, can look at the slides for getting how to do it. Free association is again something where in relation to a particular word, as I had told you during the first task we did together, any idea that comes to your mind, you just making a list of that. So, if I have an idea how to make a class more interesting, then I separate these words into the basic components. Class, I make it into more, let us say I make it into interesting. So, I have 3 words, and when I start free association, anything that comes under the category of any word that comes to my mind when I talk about class, I might say category, class I might say glass because it sounds close to that, class I might say classy, class I might say students. I can come up with many. I isolate this and I talk about more, I can say less, I talk about great, temptation, I can talk about any list of ideas, interesting, I can come up with many other ideas. Now, what is basically happening over here is that these ideas are generated in isolation, and then you start linking, you try to make connections. Okay, you see that classy might have something to do at some point of time with class. Class also happens to have different categories of students. So, you see that you come up with new relationships, new possibilities of linkages that you can use, and class can have less number of students, classes can be great, classes more is a temptation, there might be a temptation to relieve classes. So, this way you can start linking the ideas and then come up with some, if not one, maybe 5 different solutions which you have, and some of them might seem idiotic, but 1 or 2 might actually work, and you are coming up, you are generating new ideas, because you are not following the main route, the route which your mind, the schema, your basic orientation, your logic and your learning throughout these many days have taught you. These have taught you certain things. So, the moment you try to solve it, these things will come to your mind. Okay, it is a classroom, I take classes, in classes this is what generally happens. So, you start thinking along your experience, what you have learnt and all that. So, you are walking along a beaten path, you know this particular path. But if you take side paths which have not been discovered, where the links have not been met, you might find that there are very interesting explorations to be made, discoveries to be made. Okay. So, free association, again I said that they can be elaborated. The last thing I will be doing with you is quickly touch upon another kind of thinking which is pretty popular and successful. In the last session, when I talked to you about creativity in the context of theories, I told that there are many theories of about thinking, and you see that De Bono has been criticized for some of his ideas in terms of how useful they are in the context of let us say academic thinking. But in the context of creative thinking, De Bono's ideas usually have been very successful, have been used both in the industry and have been explored to a certain extent in the context of academia as well. From the context of and from the perspective of soft skills, I have a feeling that this also, although a little elaborate, is something which can happen, which can be pretty meaningful, and I am sure that there will be many websites where these techniques are elaborated, and I hope they will convince you of the relevance of these techniques. 6 thinking hats is about 6 different kinds of thinking which actually take place when we are thinking simultaneously or in sequence, but which are isolated here. If I am thinking about a problem, maybe all the thinking, different kinds of thinking come together. I say that what if I do this, then immediately I say that now this is a ridiculous idea, let me not think about it. Now, what is happening is that this particular ridiculous kind of thinking, which could have succeeded at some point of time, has been kind of curbed. When vaccines were first introduced in Europe, you find that many people found it ridiculous that a diseased organism is being injected into a healthy body. Okay, so it sounded absurd, it sounded ridiculous, outrageous, but you see that the fact that it was the pioneer, the inventor continued with that, was what kind of gave rise to a total revolution in the field of immunization. So, you see that different kinds of thinking have their different spaces, and the 6 thinking hats permits you to think in these different spaces independently without fearing that the other kind of thinking will interpose. So, let us say that to begin with, when you pose the problem or you come up with a problem, you start by covering all the facts, figures, information needs and gaps, draw all arguments. You are not looking at what will happen, what is good, what is bad, anything of that kind. You are just looking at the facts. The class is not interesting. You are not asking the question, why is this class not interesting, how to make it more interesting, should I go for a response from the students? No, you are not thinking about these things. What are the things about this class which are not interesting? Making a list of it without thinking any kind of. So, facts and only facts. This is where you are not again thinking rationally. You are talking about your gut feeling, your impulse, any outrageous impulsive kind of thing that comes to your mind. The kind of free associative thinking we had been talking about all this while is what you encourage. Judgment, caution, logical. Okay. Now, this is where after you say that okay, this is the problem, one has to be very careful. Classrooms are very sensitive places, students have very sensitive minds, they can be modified, I mean they can be manipulated, they can feel outraged, the injustice can be done to them. So, one has to be very careful. So, you make a list of those qualities, but you are keeping it separately, logical and positive. Okay. Now, you are doing something kind of thinking, okay, this will work, even if it may not work, it is still logical. So, hopefully that it will work. With a positive attitude, you are doing a little bit of logical thinking. You are doing creative alternatives, possibilities, wide range of possibilities, alternatives, change, provocation, critical argumentation, whatever it is, you are doing that. Okay. But essentially creativity, that is what you are highlighting over here. And then this is the last kind of thinking, where the other 5 kinds of thinking are brought together, and at no point of time are you isolating or saying that okay, this individual said that. You are just looking at the thoughts, the different thoughts, different kinds of thought processes which have been involved, rather than looking at the thinkers who have done this thought explored or thought in this particular way. The idea is to look at the ideas rather than the people who have generated the ideas, to delink people from processes, people from problems. That way a certain degree of detachment is something which you are able to develop, and you might be able to solve the problem in a more interesting, more meaningful way. So, here are some of the references. I will be sharing some more in the slides, and I have a feeling that this, to sum up of what we have done so far, is that we have looked at the basic concept of creativity, we have looked at theories of creativity, we have also looked at some of the basic do's and don'ts, and we have also tried out a few tools ourselves. We are now aware of 5 or 6 different tools, and if you start googling, you will find that hundreds of tools, different tools are available. Now, it is important to find out which tool fits you, which tool you are comfortable with. It is also important to find out which tools you can use individually and which tools you can use in groups, and then maybe try them out. I hope that this will be very meaningful in many contexts where you will be dealing with other people. You have to come up with new ideas as quickly as possible, and I hope that some of these things, if you did not know about them, will help you meaningfully. If you knew about them, then at least it reinforces your conviction that these tools work. Thank you very much.